So we're going to do a quick introduction to shading with colored pencils. You guys already learned about the different positions for your hand. You have writing, which is really great for fine details. Overhand, which is pretty good for getting large areas colored. And then extended overhand, which is even larger areas with a lighter color. Today, we're also going to learn some techniques. So what you're going to do is you're going to be turning in a piece of paper with a photo of these squares, basically rectangles, I guess would be the correct term. And I want to make sure that you have them labeled. So if you have a sketchbook at home that you're using, that's fine. If you're just using printer paper, or if you need paper, you can come in and pick it up. I have some in the office. So the first is, it's called pressure shading. So you start with high pressure and you decrease the pressure. I'm using my extended overhand. I'm also doing little circles, and I'm using my finger to increase the pressure. And we release the pressure, and that gives us less color. So now we have a pressure gradient. Then the next one is layering. So I'm going to put down a color, really light layer, till halfway, a little bit over halfway. And I'm going to take a different color. I'm going to do the same thing. And I'm just going to go back and forth until I get a smooth transition between the two colors. I might even do a little bit of pressure gradient where I'm putting extra pressure on the back end to fill in that extra area, and then lightening as I go into the other area. So this one builds into this one. So increased pressure to decreased, layering back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It is important that you switch back and forth between your colors, because if you just build up a gradient really intensely and you don't switch back and forth, you won't get a nice smooth transition. You'll end up with a really hard line. Now, if you notice, my red is going all the way to over here, and my purple is here, but it will be over here. So there's very little area that doesn't have any color in it. If you do the mistake that a lot of people do, where they increase their color and then they decrease it, and then wherever they end their decrease, they start the new color, you end up with a big white space in the middle. So we don't want to do this guy. This guy is not correct. We really want overlapping color in this area. Okay, now we have a decent gradient. So this is layering. The next one is called burnishing. And this one you need a little bit of information. So let's go down here. There's something called the tooth of the paper. And if you were to zoom in on the edge of a paper, you would see this. And what this is little bits of fiber sticking up. It's actually what grabs your pencil. As your pencil comes across your paper, it grabs little bits of color. That's what you see. So if you notice, there's lots of white spots in here. That's the valleys of the paper and the tooth of the paper showing through, right? So you're not coloring in the full tooth, you're only coloring parts of it, so that's why we see little white spots. What burnishing does is it fills up the entire part and kind of pushes down the teeth, so everything's really shiny and smooth. The one thing you need to know is that once this is all filled up and you go to put a new color on top, it won't stick very well because there's nothing to grab it. So whenever you use burnishing, we want to limit it so that it's the last thing you're using. So burnishing is just pressing, not hard enough to hurt your hand. Your hand should not hurt. Now I might have to do a couple layers to get rid of all the white spots. We're going to go ahead and take this. You're going to see there's a little bit that sticks, but compared to over here, very little of it is sticking because it's just skimming across the top of the waxy surface. So whenever we use burnishing, this is last layer. The way to get an extra layer if you accidentally make a mistake is you have to have something called a matte workable fixative. And since I don't provide that for you, I want you to really think of this as a last layer. You shouldn't burnish until you're on your last layer. This very last thing is a color blender. Now, some of you may have bought your own pencils and you may have gotten something called a colorless blender. Now, because you're in public school, we don't have colorless blenders. Instead, I want you to use your white pencil, and this will basically do what a colorless blender does. It will burnish for you without you having to put a ton of color down. So let's say I want a decently light color here with maybe some variation. So I'm going to add some pressure in there and then lighten again. Maybe you want to do like a metal texture or something. But I don't want to go in and add a ton of color, and I don't want to burnish with the purple because I don't want it to be super dark. But I do want it to be smooth. What do? I take a colorless blender or a white pencil, and I'm going to burnish with that. And you're going to see it kind of smooths everything out. I do recommend going multiple ways so that you hit these teeth from multiple directions with your colorless blender. So a lot of artists will do circles. So if you notice, because it's white, it did lighten the color a little bit. If you had a colorless blender, it wouldn't lighten it at all. However, there's very little lightening, so I think it's a worthwhile technique. So we use white color pencils for our blenders, but if you have a colorless blender, feel free to use it. These are the 4 techniques. I want you to do what you see here, take a picture of it, and submit it for your assignment today.